G'day everyone and welcome to the shed. You would not believe how hectic our lives have been over these last few months, and naturally things like YouTube and social media have suffered a little bit. But today I'm just ready to do something fun, and I think we're going to go back to our brown Kingswood ute. I'll just make a quick cup of tea for my lovely wife and myself, and we'll get back into our HG door. So as you recall, when we left it, oh that's going to be a nice brew. So about 100 years ago when we put this down, I had cut this piece off another car, and it's a fairly ordinary piece, so we've got to do a repair on it. But what it does give us is a good section here with the factory Holden pressing in it to repair this section in the door where the speaker's been chopped out. We've also got quite a bit of damage to the frame in here underneath, so I've got this section from the other door as well, and as you can see it's pretty ordinary and rusty, but the piece we want is just basically this edge along here, this pressing in here, so I'm hoping we can cut it somewhere above the worst of this rust and into this good section here, straight up there. Once we've got the top off the skin here, we can actually see into the frame, and we've got enough room to be able to weld this piece in easily, and we can finish it ready to put our new piece on the top. We've also got these holes where I've drilled it through to separate the spot welds, and all going well, these should line back up with our replacement panel as well. We've got quite a bit of rust on the inside here, but if I cut it somewhere along here, we're well underneath this little bit of a factory pressing. We should be able to get a nice butt weld on there and finish it off nicely. And we'll come back to somewhere around about here. I'm not worried about this little spot in here. I can put a bit of weld in that, but I'm thinking that my door's actually in pretty good nick there. So we might be cutting it through here and across to there or something like that yet, but we can decide that in the future. So we'll go from here and we'll start making our new piece. What I've done is I've just cut 3 panels, and I'm planning on making 3 of these corners. And what I'm going to do, we'll get this piece of wood and we'll cut it and make a hammer form with it. Now hammer forming will always be my favourite form of metal shaping because it's just so versatile. You can get a really nice factory looking finish to it, and they're so easy to make. And I've only got a piece of pine here today. It doesn't have to be anything really flash. Any hardwood, and pine's not really a hardwood, but it's hard enough to do what we want to do. But what my plan is, we'll start with the no-brainer one. So we'll cut this to shape, get it all ready, we'll trim a panel to the right size, and then we'll sandwich it in here and we'll dress it over. But I'm thinking we'll go with about a 3/8 of an inch or 10mm sort of lap over the top, and that one's an easy amount of metal to actually dress around with just a hammer, and we won't have too many dramas at all with that. And naturally, if something goes a little bit funky on the way, we'll repair it as we go on the fly like we usually do, because it doesn't always go to plan. So we'll build that one, and then we'll look at a bigger one, and we'll probably go to about 15mm, sort of around about 5/8 of an inch, something like that, 9/16, and we'll just throw a bit more metal around and see what dramas we have with doing the extra bit of shrinkage and pulling that extra piece of metal down. And then we'll go with probably the impossible, and we'll put a bigger amount of metal out, not sure, maybe 7/8, maybe even try for an inch, so that'll be about 25mm, and we'll just see what happens. But the beauty of this is we can talk about what's going wrong with the metal and what you can do if you're trying to save it. When we evolve from being able to bend a piece of metal, and by bending I mean just putting it in a vise and tapping it over and you wind up with a bit of a line through it or something like that, to actually being able to shape a piece of metal, you've got to stop thinking of a piece of metal as a solid thing. You've got to start thinking of it as a very malleable, flexible thing, not unlike this. So if we look at this and we put a bend in it like that, one side of it is going to scrunch up and it's going to shrink. The other side has got to stretch around and it's going to stretch. So every time we do something to a piece of metal, it's going to shrink or it's going to stretch. So that's all pretty easy. But if we're going to make it curve around a corner, we're going to have a whole raft of things happening to get it to make this fold around the corner. And we're going to wind up with the molecules in the steel all getting closer together where we're shrinking this edge down. And you will reach the point where you can't make it go any further with simple hand tools for sure. But what we can get away with is what we're looking at. So if we keep thinking of our piece of metal as being like a sponge, and it'll stretch out and it'll squash up, then we've got an idea on what the metal's doing as we're working it. It's actually been so long since we've worked on this door that it had grown a heap of cobwebs and 14 generations of redback spiders had moved in there, and I had to chase them all out this morning, and the younger ones were saying, look, I was born in this door, I'm going to die in this door. So they took a bit of convincing, and with some of them their proposal was acceptable. The rest of them I humanely removed and put somewhere else. Now for this sort of work you don't have to be a master woodworker. I've got a jigsaw, I'm just going to rip around here with it. We'll do the other end, we'll split our board in half, and then what I'll do is I'll clamp them together and I'll finish them with just my sanding disc, and that'll get the shape I want, and then we can use that shape and work it into our rusty piece of door, and we can get it so it matches perfectly to the door, and we're ready to make our new piece. So naturally, iron hearing protection, and we're into it. So that's given us our two pieces for our hammer form. We've just got to get the shape right, and you can see we're going to clamp it together. But what we'll do with this one is, because there is a hole in our piece of metal just in here for the door trim to clip into, we can use that hole and put a bolt through it, and then we can take our piece of metal out and put it back in several times, and we know it's going to come back to exactly the same spot each time. We will need to make this little recess in here for the door trim clip to actually flush into, otherwise it's going to prop the card out from the edge of the door when we've got the car assembled, but we can make that in our hammer form as well. Now it's not bad straight off the saw, but it's not quite in, just in this little corner down here, and we've also got a bit of a radius area on this corner. So what I'll do is I'll just sand it around a little bit more to make it tuck into the shape a little bit better, and then we'll look at putting a little bit of a radius all the way around it. Now with wood it will squash up a little bit, so you don't want it exactly right unless you're using a really hard wood like an oak or a jarrah or something like that. Pine will squash just that little bit. If you find you've made your piece and the corner is too sharp, you can actually just put it onto a little T-dolly with a little small radius one, say like a 5/16 or an 8mm sort of radius, and you can work your way along your new section and just hammer the corner. So you would sit it on your little dolly in the vise and hammer this corner here to just take the sharpness off it, and that'll work quite well as well. So get one made up, and then we'll match the second one to it. I'm just using my normal 3M disc on here, and that's working fine. It'll rip the piece of wood down to how we want it without any dramas at all. So. Now my usual grinding grit for most of my metalwork is a 60 grit, and that's what's on there at the moment. I've got some 36 grit discs in the cupboard, but this is pulling it off nicely. You know what? I reckon that's pretty good. Righto, so I'll just look at this bit of a radius around here, and it's a bit broader radius in the corner than what is along the edges, so we're going to have to take off more in this area than what we do back here. So now this one has got this bit of a rebate that I've cut previously when I was setting a router up. So what I'll do is I'll match this block up to the other one, and then this can be our outside piece for here, and that way we won't be worrying about knocking something into this hole in here. Now your second piece of wood's always going to be easy. It's just a matter of clamping the two together and then grinding it to the right shape. So that's what we'll do right now. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I reckon that's pretty damn nice. Doesn't this look lovely? Now I've got him tucked in there nice, and I can come in here and I can cut this hole in here. Now we could actually just drill through the door panel here, and that would give us an accurate hole, and in fact we might even do that. Right toe. So how it's going to work is we're going to put our piece of metal in there, we'll put our second piece of wood on there, and then we'll hammer it over the edge. Very, very, very easy. But we're going to start with 3/8 of an inch, so we want 3/8 in there and 3/8 in there, and then we're going to want a 3/8 line around there to cut our piece of material to. So the easiest way to do that is to just mark it at 3/8 of an inch, or if you are thoroughly metricated, 10mm, near enough. Yes, I know they're not quite the same, but they're near enough. We will put our piece of wood in there. And for what we want to do, all I'm going to do is pick that up there and swing that around there, and I've got a cut line. Over the years I've been in a lot of trouble with a lot of my friends because I described the things I do as easy, and it really is, but the easiest thing to remember, easy, with doing any jobs on your old cars, if you are finding it difficult, you are probably doing it wrong. So if you have any process that you're going through and you hit a bit of a roadblock and fall in a heap, that's when it's time to say, no, this is too hard, it's not working, I've got to go back and research it more. And then once you find the easy way, it will be easy. Just a bit of a play day today. Right, so if we put that there and that there, and we have got our 10mm there, 3/8 of an inch, and we will just quickly punch a hole through that. Spot weld drill. It's one I've been using for drilling out a heap of spot welds. It's blunt. Now just going to deburr this hole, and if you just use a bigger drill bit and twist it in the hole, you'll take the burrs off it. Learned that in high school. So, Mr. Reed, Mr. Williams, if you're watching, learned that from you guys. Right, now I just need to find a bolt. We'll bolt him together and then we'll get into hammer forming it. So I've got my piece of metal sandwiched between the two hammer forms, and we're going to throw it this way because that's the edge with the nice radius corner on it. And could have made it a little bit taller in here, but I didn't. But we'll be able to cut that and do what we want with it. We can also just fold that easily as we go. Now the big thing to remember with shaping is don't rush into it, don't do any big things. What we want to do is just gently walk this around the corner. So we'll get him set up in the vise, and I'll show you what I mean. It always works better if you use a drift or something like that, something to just sort of work it around rather than hitting it straight with the hammer. The hammer does work, but I find that just using a piece of wood in there, you get a nicer finish on it. So what we're just trying to achieve is just this slightest little tip, because what we've got to do is let this piece of metal rearrange the molecules within it. So it's fine when we're doing this little straight fold along here, it's going to tip over quite nicely. But when we come to this radius up here, all of the molecules, and once we get down to a molecular level, they've all got to move. So what actually happens is they're going to do this. They're going to push in closer together, and we're going to wind up with a more dense piece of metal around the corner there. And it's the same as forging. Like when something has been forged, it's been put under high pressure when it's hot. Well, we're putting it under high pressure, and we're just moving it around the corner. So from a shaping point of view, I like this. This is fun. This is what I live for. So, but just don't rush into it. Now the amount of metal we're throwing over, this really is an easy job. The problems come in, and it shouldn't with this one, is you might wind up with a high spot right in the base in here where it wants to kick back the other way. So what we've got is, because we can rest our piece of wood on this outer form all the way around, we should prevent that from happening. So as we get our angle further across, this will stand up more and more, and we'll keep that bottom edge in all the way around. So. Now, I would say we only want to be trying to look at shift this 2 millimetres, 1/16 of an inch, something like that at each pass. We don't want heaps of metal thrown over. As soon as we start pushing this end over without moving this around here, we'll wind up with an area of this web here that's been stretched when we're trying to actually shrink it. So we're just going to be a bit wary of that. Now we've got one little spot in here, it's starting to want to pop back on me. So this is where we're actually really starting to shrink the metal in. So where we get these little ripples in it like that, what we want to do is stay in control and just take them out each time we see one. And see, I'm just tapping it, I'm not hitting it. It's enough to just let all those little molecules know that we want them to sit a little bit closer together. Look at that, isn't it cool? At the moment I'm shrinking metal by planishing it. Right, we've got it nearly there, and we can see we've got these lumps and bumps we're going to have to shrink down, but they're just going to be a case of the same as what we've been doing. Just Stay in control, just a matter of working it a little bit by little bit on each one. I'm just working on the highest one each time. Just bring that edge over a little bit there. And down she comes. Righto, we've got that pretty nice, a few little lumps and bumps. But the more we keep playing with it, the smoother we will get it. So, I've got it about as far as I'm going to get it at the moment on the Hammerform, so I'll take it off and just see how it fits against our replacement piece. And it's going to need a little bit of adjustment because it's not quite a 90-degree angle down the side here, and same thing in the corner there. So we'll sit it over the top of it and see where we're at. We'll do our little adjustments, and we've still got a few wrinkles and puckers to pull out of it. And this is the easy fold. Once we go to bigger pieces of metal, it's going to be more work each time to actually get that edge to shrink, and we'll talk about some of that as we go. So we've got a pretty good shape to the original. That actually sits over and curves around there quite well. So what we can do is even just clamp it on there and give that a little bit of a tappy tap on there, and we'll get that fitting better again anyway. So we might just see what we can do. This little piece where our Hammerform wasn't quite long enough, I might put a clamp on there and just tap that down. Now it's a little bit rusty to be playing this silly game on this piece, but we're pretty close to being the right shape. So when you look at it like that, we've got a good representation of what the original's like. So from this point, we can actually trim this and work it, and as we weld the next piece in here, we can get this edge to settle down, but we can also use my nice trusty piece of round bar, and we can set that edge on there, and we can dress some of the puckers out of it on that piece there. So we'll just run that and do that. So what I'll do is we've still got these few little ripples in here just around this edge. So we'll get them and we'll just put them on this big piece of round bar. I use this a lot. It's a really good anvil. And it's just a matter of, same thing. I'm not belting the absolute crap out of it. I'm just tapping it down, and it's really doing what I want it to do. That little piece I threw up, I've got a little bit of a curl back the other way. Now that can be hammered out, or we could just put it in the shrinker and tighten it up in there, and that would straighten that line out. But I think just something like that, and then take the little puckers out of it afterwards, will actually work. It's got most of it out now, there's a little bit left. So, and then once again, Isaac Newton, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. You shift it in one spot, it wants to curl in another, but that's not really going to bother us. We can attach it to the door. At this point, we could make it fit the door quite easily. So I think we'll just leave this one here, and we'll start making one with, say, 5/8 of an inch poking out, and we'll have a look at how that works as well. I've got him set up now to do our 5/8 throw over. Now this is in the region, if we got out there with our shrinker and did a heap of pre-shrinks around this area here, it will help us. The sad thing is it'll work harden the metal to a degree as well, and that comes down to that making the metal more dense there. I'm not going to worry about it so much with this one, because in the past I've done it like that, and you do wind up with what I was talking about before, where you wind up with a bulge of metal wanting to sit out just around the edge of the form here, and sometimes it'll actually sort of come out and want to sit like that, and it's all sort of the wrong shape for what you want. So we'll just go back in the bench, and it's just a bit of experimental, it's just a bit of fun, we'll just have a play with it, and we'll see how we come up. And what I'll do is I'll just choose the nicest one, and we'll weld it onto the car door. Put him a bit like that. Righto. So same thing again, just start throwing it over. Alright, we're already seeing some little wavy bits in here. So it wobbles either way through there. So this is where we're going to really have to start shrinking this outside edge down here. Alright, look at this big pucker we've got in it now. Alright, we can see where it's all starting to scrunch up and squash in. Little lines in there are the shrinking marks. Alright, I'm starting to have to work a bit now. We will start coming into the limitations of what our wood will allow us to do, because the wooden piece will actually collapse underneath some of these wrinkles. Because Deb's just pointed out that this has actually got longer this way, and that's because that piece of metal has actually changed shape, it's spreading out there as well. We can actually trim that back a little bit now and get rid of that edge, and it's less material to shrink. But what I'm going to do is just put in the vise this way to hold this corner in place, so it's not going to pop out as I'm hitting it. if I've got enough length in my vice screw. Ooh, no, not going to let me do it. Might do actually. Yeah, I think the screw's out of the thread block though. Oh no, we're there. Just. Don't know if I'm going to get a mark on there or not like this. Trim a little bit off the edge here, and we'll just run it around there. Sort of proven that that's about the extent of what we're going to get a reasonable edge around there. But we'll persevere and we'll make a wider one again yet. See what happens, just for fun. Now, what I'm doing is balancing the low spots in the waves on here. So you can imagine the high point from the back will be this bump here. So I'm balancing that on the top of there, and then I'm hitting either side of it. And same as a panel beater removes a dent from a panel, whereas using the dolly off method, where the hammer is hitting the metal around the area and the dolly is supporting the centre of the dent from the back. So that's what we're doing here, and we're shrinking the metal by doing this with planishing. Now naturally, if we reach the point where we are squashing the metal like that with that big tinny sound like that, we're stretching the metal, so we don't want that. So what we're doing is just shrinking the high spots down and lifting the low spots up. Now this will persevere and make a good repair patch. I have no doubt about that at all. So that's got most of the waves out. That's coming close to what we're looking for now. And I can sit here and spend another 10-15 minutes on it, and I will get that very nice. And this one might even be the piece I use. I actually like this one. It's got a little bit of a reverse flow back here where we've had it unsupported, but once again, if we'd chosen a bit bigger piece of wood, we would have escaped that. But looking at our rusty section, how much of it do we actually need? So we could come in here and we could cut it straight across there, and we don't even need that piece. This one will be a successful repair patch, and I'm fairly confident this is the one I will use, just because I like the amount of metal I've thrown over. You can cheat a bit with these. If you find you're having trouble and it's puckering too much for what you're capable of shrinking down, you can leave this piece at the width it is, and you can trim this section back, and we know that that 10mm 3/8 of an inch in a piece of 20 gauge material is going to settle down quite nicely. So for all the Aussies out there, a bit of 1mm cold rolled sheet. So that'll work fine. So I'm still convinced this will be the one. So let's just try the big one and see if we can do some damage and see what happens. Now poor old Hammerform's starting to cop a bit of damage. So we can see on here it's actually dented it in where those little waves were sort of coming in the metal, and that's why the piece reacted so quickly once we put it on the piece of round bar, because steel on steel is a whole different dynamic to steel on wood. So if we have a look at that, now because of how much work we had to do to shrink down that 5/8 of an inch throw, going out to a 1 inch 25mm piece, I am just going to go and pre-shrink this corner as much as I can. The problem with it is, unless we have it clamped to our wood, we're going to get it to pull further back in than what we wanted. If we put it onto our piece of wood, we're not going to get the shrinker jaws in as far, and the shrink's going to sit further out and it'll create a bulge in this area before we even get started. So it's going to be a little bit of see what happens, and we probably rely on the hammer form itself to actually flatten any distortion out that we get back in this area here, which is where we don't want it. So we'll go and shrink him and we'll see what happens there, and then we'll start working it in the vise. I'm going to go in two goes. I'm going to put a little close to the edge shrink on here to start with, and then we'll come back and do a deep shrink with it right the way into the jaws. Same as any shrinking, it's little bit by little bit, and stay in control of it. Now, it's starting to create a curved edge, so we're going to reach the point where these jaws are too wide, and they're not going to allow us to get much more shrinking action in. So I think we'll go one more pass out on the edge. This is the area that needs the most shrinking. Right, so that's about as far as I think I'm ready to push it at this point. Anything more than that, we're going to create too much of a pucker in here to be able to work it back out with our simple tools. So we've got a little bit of a curved area right down next to our hammer form in here, but once we tighten it up and when we put it around in the vise, that will all come out. Alright, so you could say we're pretty much halfway there already. So we've got a stretch in here though, because we've started here. We've actually got this stretching back out to go around to the straight piece, so we'll have to work that stretch down before we get too carried away. Now I need to hit this a bit harder because we have got a bigger piece of metal that we've got to tell we would like you to be a different shape. Now I've even used my 2-pound engineer's hammer with ball peen for doing this sort of work, not for actually hitting the metal as such, but for driving the drift. Mainly once you get to heavier stuff, and I've done this with 16 gauge, 1.6mm material and in zinc anneal, so that's high tensile as well, but not with wood. I've used steel formers, but I'll show you that in a minute. Now, to be expected, bigger piece of metal, bigger waves. Okay, I might just trim a little bit off that. Just mark up our 25 millimeters. I'm using my drift to just support the previous wave sort of thing when I'm working on the next one. And you don't really need a lot of pressure on there to stop it from popping up and creating just a rocking motion from going from one to the other. So a bit of weight on there and work the next one, and that helps a lot for getting these little wrinkles smoothed out. But you can see from these high points and how much bruised they are from the hammer, there's a pretty heavy shrinking process going on in there. So we're still actually succeeding. It's coming down as we go. And so we'll go for a little bit longer. We'll put on that bit of round bar and see what we can pull out of it. But once again, we've got a pretty reasonable piece with a huge amount of metal there. I just love hammer forming. It just works so well. Alright, we'll take it out and we'll put on the bit of round bar and see how we're going with that. So we've got our big heavy wrinkling around the edge, and I'm not expecting a perfect result here, but we would get a usable result out of this. We could get it in there, and the process of welding it, even if it was out of alignment a little bit, providing you could get into the back of this in your application, we could actually work that down and use the shrinkage of the welding to actually tighten some of this up again. We've gone about as far as we're going to get with it, with this sort of setup, with using the tools we're using. What's happening now is it's curving back this way. If you wanted to persevere, like I say, I do agree that we could get this much metal to work. It would be a case of doing what I'm doing now, going back to the hammer form, clamping it back in that to get it flat, working the metal again, and it comes down to the time price that you want to spend on it. But for my money, the second one we made is the best one, and that'll be the one I'm using. But what can we achieve with this? Well, I'll show you something I've made before. So here's a pair of steel hammer forms that I made years ago when I made these tailgates, and this is a piece of 16 gauge zinc anneal. So that fits in there nicely, and that has pulled up probably nearly ½ an inch of material around there, and it's created a nice smooth finish. And that's what you can achieve with a steel hammer form, because you can use it as an anvil. You just keep shrinking it down. Because it's clamped so well, there is nowhere else for the metal to go. We probably could have even got a little bit further than what we did with it, but because I was going to weld a corner in here, because the outside piece is actually a bit different shape, it comes out and rolls around like that, I decided to just go half and half to make it easy to put a weld on there. But it will throw it up. If you want to put the time into making decent hammer forms, you can make some interesting things. Earlier on I talked about doing this little recess in here for the door trim clip. So what it's got is there's a little plastic insert fits in there to stop the moisture coming through past the clip and wrecking the door trim. And then this little metal clip actually hooks in there, and the recess is for the plastic insert and the back of the steel clip to actually tuck into it so that it doesn't have the door card propped proud of the door. So what we're going to do is just remove a little piece of wood out of our hammer form, and then we'll just use a small socket, put on there with the hammer a couple of times, and we'll create this little recess here. I've got this piece of tubing and I've just ground the centre out to make a sharp edge around the outside. Now if I'd had a little bit larger piece of tubing, I could have actually got away with just grinding the outside in quite easily with a little disc sander to make a sharp edge. So in effect we've just made a small wad punch that we can hit with a hammer and chop the wood grain a little bit to make it happen. So the little oval shaped hole is at its outside edge, centred on the hole in the middle. So we've centred this up on our hole that we've already put in our hammer form, and we should be able to just chop the wood just like that and move it back a little bit. Let's give them a little bit more. If we remove the wood from the centre, once again, you don't really need to be a skilled woodworker to achieve this level of work. All my chippy mates out there will be cringing watching what I do. But I restore old cars, I don't make cabinets. Now, providing we can get through this without leaking blood all over the wood, I would call it a success. Poor old chisel could do it with a sharpen, I would say. Once again, all my chippy friends, avert your gaze. Works better anyway. And that's probably around about deep enough for what we want to do. I'll get out the corners. And there we have our little recess. So there we've got our little recess for our clip to fit in there. And that's all going to work beautifully once we put it together. This is that middle one that I made, the in-between one. I've still got a bit of work to do on that. I'll tidy all this up. I'll get it attached onto there, and then when we come back, we can look at repairing the frame on the door and getting it all together. Thank you very much everyone for watching. I'm Rob Teal. Keep it real, stay safe, and we'll catch you next time.